Good morning. It's Thursday, and welcome to day 4 of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness Annual Training Institute and Conference. I'm Madeline Ravish from the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and we're thrilled to have you here for day 4 of our Housing Equals Justice Conference. And today we're kicking off, as we have on other days, with our member spotlight. Today, we are delighted to be featuring a really important community-based organization in New Haven, Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen. So you're in for a really wonderful morning this morning, and thank you for joining us bright and early. So a little bit about the Housing Equals Justice Conference. If you haven't attended other sessions, you still have 2 days left to participate in, so we hope you will. It's been a really fabulous conference so far. We decided this year that we should focus on the major themes of racial justice, criminal justice, and economic justice, which are 3 threads that run throughout our work ending homelessness. And we're really delighted to have had such amazing presenters here for this conference. We also are doing a deep dive into COVID and its implication for the homeless response system. And what we're seeing under COVID is so important. So hope that you're taking advantage of all the many sessions. We are on social media, so please do give us a shout out if you want to on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our hashtag is ATI2020. Please help us tell the world that housing equals justice. And of course, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Bank of America and Zillow, our 2 presenting sponsors who've made it possible for us to offer you this wonderful conference free of charge. So thank you, Bank of America and Zillow. We're thrilled to have had over 1,000 people at this conference this week so far, and it's really been amazing. And we've been doing our sponsors, so thank you. And if you haven't checked out our Housing Equals Justice store, please do. We have t-shirts, face masks, and mugs, t-shirts. So please check it out. The proceeds benefit our work to end homelessness, and it's a great way of making sure that people really do understand the importance of housing. And so right now, I'm really thrilled to introduce is a funny way to say it, because Steve Werlin from Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen is here with us today. Steve was very thoughtful because it's the Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen. So as you can imagine, there's not a lot going on in the morning. And so Steve was great to put together a little video to show you what Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen does. You have all seen, if you've been to any of our other member showcases, you know that we normally do these live, but what is nice here is that we have Steve here to talk a little bit, answer some questions. I have a few questions for Steve. Please use the chat to let us know what other questions that you have. We really want this to be a good conversation, so please send your questions our way. And so with that, I think we'll just take a moment to show this video that we're thrilled that Des put together to help us understand what Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen is doing that's so important in our community.
Hi, my name is Steve Werlin. I'm at Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen right now. Desk's mission here is to serve people who are experiencing homelessness and living in poverty by providing food assistance and services that promote health, community, and equity. We do that by offering 2 programs. Our flagship program is a dinner program. We offer 5 nights a week, and then work with students at Yale to offer that on the 6th and 7th nights of the week, Friday and Saturday. But also we do a food pantry, and that's what's going on here behind me. Every Wednesday we set up for our food pantry, and since COVID has started, of course, we've been doing all of this outside. So you can see behind me the tent on the front lawn of the building that we use. Each week we get anywhere between 100 and 130 people coming for our food pantry. Almost by definition, those who are coming to our food pantry are housed. The program relies very heavily on volunteers. For our food pantry program, we usually have somewhere between about 6 and 10 volunteers who are helping us. Since COVID has started, we've tried to keep the numbers of volunteers fairly low to encourage social distancing. But again, doing it outside kind of gives us a little bit of wiggle room to be able to have increased numbers when it's possible. That said, we have had problems getting additional volunteers during COVID, just because people aren't quite so willing to volunteer the way they were sort of at the very beginning of the pandemic. In normal times, pre-COVID times, the food pantry program would have been done in our dining room space where we serve dinner at night. But since the start of the pandemic, everything has been moved outside. We set up tents on the front here, and we start serving every Wednesday around 1:45, and continue to provide groceries straight through for until about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon. The hardest parts throughout the pandemic has been ensuring the safety of the clients who are coming to us during pantry. We've painted footprints on the ground to try to encourage social distancing. It's worked to varying degrees. We also insist that anyone coming up to our pantry is wearing a mask, and if they don't have a mask, then we provide them on site here. So right now we are here in the dining room at Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen. I call it the dining room because in normal times this is where, of course, people are sitting and eating. But during the pandemic, our dining room here has actually been transformed pretty much into a warehouse. All of our operations have moved outside, of course, both for our pantry program and our dinner program. And we've been receiving a lot more donations and stocking up a lot more food than we have in the past. Okay, so here we are at our dinner program. We usually start serving around 4:30. This is a little bit different than how we were doing it in the pre-COVID times when we were serving a little bit later. For those who are coming to us at dinner, and I'm going to be a little careful here because I don't want to get people on the shot, but for those who come to us for dinner, during normal times, during pre-COVID times, we were serving at around 5:30 in the evening or 5:45. And therefore, anyone who is experiencing homelessness and coming to us is by definition unsheltered. And that's because it would be impossible for someone to come here for dinner and be at the shelter. So for that reason, if someone tells us that they're experiencing homelessness, we can assume that they're experiencing unsheltered homelessness. The program these days is a little bit earlier than it was in the pre-COVID time, so we're serving around 4:30. And everything right now is grab and go. So we have sort of prepared sandwiches and prepared drinks, and we do hot meals a couple of times a week, but generally we're trying to keep everything as simple and as easy to eat sort of on the go. But one of the important things that we're continuing to do is to remain a point of contact for the people who are coming to us for dinner, particularly for those who are on the street. So we're providing health services through a partnership with the Hill Health Street Medicine Team, and we're working with the Sex Workers and Allies Network in order to get harm reduction supplies to the people we're serving as well.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I am SWAN's Outreach Manager here in the SWAN Mobile, which we just picked up last couple days ago. And I hand out harm reduction supplies such as Narcan, fentanyl test strips, syringes, condoms, masks, and gloves. So here we are in the Mobile, and we are going all over New Haven now, spreading the love.
The folks you see behind me include people from Columbus House and from Hill Health and from CMHC, constantly working with other organizations in order to provide additional services right on site. Again, in pre-COVID times and normal times, all of this would be happening inside the building, but we've all had to adjust in order to be doing these services outside the building. We're a little bit concerned about what this is going to look like in the winter when the weather gets cold, but for now, or at least for over the summer, doing all of this outside, whether it's working with the street medicine team or working with mental health care professionals or case managers, seems to be working outside.
Well, thank you so much to Steve and the team at Desk for preparing that wonderful video. We're really happy to have you with us, as I've said many times already today. And so please do, anybody out there, please put your questions in the chat. We love questions. And I'm going to kick off with a question right now about community-based organizations. Not everybody necessarily knows that term. And in fact, I think that many people equate homelessness and shelters when they think about services. community-based organizations is an important part of our sector that people may not always think about. So I wondered if you could take a moment to talk about community-based organizations and their role within their communities.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I think typically when we talk about community-based organizations, what I usually have in mind is grassroots organizations that are largely staffed by volunteers, or the bulk of the work is done by volunteers. And for many of the shelters and many of the housing service providers, it is also sort of the background for those organizations. I mean, many shelters got their start right in the 1980s, early 90s as community-based organizations, grassroots organizations, and just grew up over time. I think the history of sort of soup kitchens and food assistance organizations is that many of them haven't had opportunities for the kinds of funding that we've seen go toward shelters and housing organizations over the last 20 plus years. And so they've stayed small. They've stayed sort of these grassroots community-based organizations that are largely run by volunteers and are really deeply embedded within their neighborhoods, within their communities, and very, very ground level. So that's sort of what I typically have in mind when I talk about community-based organizations.
And we spoke a little bit beforehand about the important role that community-based organizations, or CBOs, as insiders sometimes say, in addressing the needs of unsheltered individuals. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's important to remember that those who are in shelters represent just one piece of the equation, right? In that, of course, there are many people who are experiencing homelessness and are on the street unsheltered, of course. And the hope has always been that through outreach efforts, people can move from an unsheltered situation, from being on the street, into shelter and ultimately into housing. But over the past decade, I think things have really moved toward the housing first approach, and the recognition that people can, that shelter is not for everybody, and that people can actually move toward housing directly from the street if funding is available for that sort of thing. And I think that's where community-based organizations and grassroots organizations really do come in. Organizations like Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen are serving, not just every day during the pandemic, but, we serve all year round, and we see the same people night after night. And it's a great opportunity for people who are conducting outreach and providing other services in order to get services to those who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness to interact with those people. When we talk to outreach workers, sometimes we hear about some of the roadblocks they hit, and of course there are many. But one of them is finding people and meeting people where they are. Well, many times where they are is where they are getting resources, and whether those resources are food or basic needs supplies or harm reduction intervention supplies. All of that can sort of happen in many of these neighborhood-based community organizations like Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen.
Thank you so much. That's great. And I was wondering, actually, as we speak about grassroots, we had somebody from SWAN there presenting. I thought maybe it would be nice for you to talk a little bit about that group, which is a really important group in New Haven.
Yeah, SWAN's an amazing organization, largely because it was started by people with lived experience, and it really it really takes to heart the idea of leadership among those who have had lived experience and are providing support to their peers. I think for a lot of organizations, we've had to come to this later on in the history of our organizations. We say, wow, we really need the voice of those with lived experience to be guiding us and telling us what we need to do. But SWAN has had that baked in from the beginning, which is just, it's best practice, of course, but it's remarkable to actually see in action. We've been working with them for the last few years. They're fearless, and they're just unbelievably dedicated outreach workers, and they have a very progressive and forward thinking approach to working with not only sex workers, with anyone on the street. And so it's been great to kind of see them take on more, and they recently got their own vehicle, and now so that they have sort of this sort of little SWAN mobile that they drive around town, and it's where they can, you know, keep all of their supplies and have everything sort of ready to go. And yeah, so it's been a good partnership.
That's great. So one of the things that I thought was really interesting in your video was the footprints. You made a comment that you put these on the ground to help people, to help sort of shape how people behave during COVID. We have totally new norms that we all have to adopt, and it's really challenging. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about COVID and how that's affected not just your organizations, but what you're seeing out in New Haven.
Yeah, I mean, obviously things have changed so much over the last 6 months. Making the decision to move outside was in many ways, it was both a very easy decision because we knew it was something we had to do, but implementing it has been very difficult. Staying on top of, I think everybody's had this experience, right? Staying on top of all of the ever-changing advice coming from, our public health officials has been difficult. I think we adopted mask wearing pretty early on. We knew that was something that we needed to do for all volunteers and all staff. And then, getting enough masks to have on hand to be handing out constantly, has certainly been an issue, but we've been staying on top of it. Footprints, as I said, I think I said in the video, it's worked to varying degrees. I mean, it is difficult. I mean, people come to Desk and they are used to being social. Desk is a social place. Our dinners, prior to COVID, you'd come into our dining room and, you see people across the room that you haven't seen in a while, and you hear, I guess, like shouting to each other, and they give each other hugs and they sit down together, and it really is a wonderful community meal, and all of that's out the window. That's just something we can't be doing right now. We can't be inside. We can't be, we can't keep people from hugging, but we're really not trying to create that circumstance where people are, coming together in that way. So that's, I think, been one of the hard parts about doing what we do, because, we provide this space so that we can serve as a forum for people who are experiencing homelessness to interact with outreach workers and healthcare workers and other service providers. And they come to us because we have food, we have basic need supplies, but also we provide that social climate. We provide a casual space where people feel comfortable, and that's really important. It's a welcoming place to people who don't feel welcome in many places in public life. So to not have that dining room and that space to be able to provide that has been difficult. It's been difficult for our guests. It's been difficult for our volunteers and our staff. We've been fortunate in that we had a fairly mild spring, and we had we're coming off of the summer here. So for the last 6 months, we've been able to recreate a lot of what we do outside. We've sort of taken over the front lawn and the sidewalk of the building we serve in, and we've set up tents. And although we don't set up picnic tables because we're not trying to encourage people to congregate and dine together. We've still been able to provide that space, and being outside hasn't been a problem. What this is going to look like in the winter is still up for discussion. We're still wrestling with how we're going to be able to connect people to services without being able to be outside and provide that sort of picnicky atmosphere that we've been providing. So that's been one of the biggest challenges that we've been wrestling with so far this fall.
I do want to come back to that question of the longer term, but I wanted, in the short term, I want to ask a follow-up question on that. So you talked about how difficult this is, not having that ability for people to come together in traditional ways. How do you see that affecting people? I don't know if you're able to see further out to the green or to the community and how people are coping, but what are you seeing right now if you do have things that you're realizing?
Yeah, I mean, the last 6 months have been difficult, but the next 6 months are going to be much harder. And I say that not for Desk specifically, but for the whole system. I mean, this is something we're all wrestling with right now. In New Haven, we're seeing our shelters go down to half capacity or less. We have other shelters that won't be reopening at all. So there will be fewer shelter beds. And we're hoping that most people who are not in shelters are going to be able to, or all people are going to be able to get into hotels. But we're still at desk preparing for there to be an unsheltered population as there has been in the past. I mean, and I think I kind of said this sort of in the video, but our target population is primarily the unsheltered population, the unsheltered people. And, during COVID, we're hoping that number is just shrinking down as far as it can. I think in New Haven, we're expecting that we'll have 50 plus people going into warming centers in the winter. And so I think our plan at this point is to provide food to those warming centers so that at the very least, we're not drawing people out. I said in the video that by definition, those who are in shelters can't come to us because you basically can't be in two places at once, right? But with the warming centers, you actually can, because we serve early enough, or in the past at least, we've served early enough so that people can come to us for dinner and then go to the warming center afterwards and be there overnight. And typically the warming centers haven't provided, they usually have like snacks or that sort of thing, but they haven't provided full meals the way we do at desk and the other soup kitchens do, and the way they do at shelters. So one sort of approach that we're looking at is providing the meals bringing them directly to the warming centers, so that rather than having people come to us, sit outside in the cold eating or eat as they're walking over to the warming center, this way we can keep them at the warming centers, hopefully, and provide the food there rather than drawing people out. And then as for those who are housed, that we're serving, the hope would be that they come to us, they get food, and they bring it right back to their home, and that we don't have people congregating outside. But all of this, of course, has implications for what our sort of underlying strategy has always been, which is to sort of use food and basic needs supplies as a way of getting people to us so that we can then connect them to additional services. If people are just coming to us and grabbing and going and really not staying the way they have been over the summer, or going to the warming centers, and we don't really have that opportunity at best to do that anymore. And really, we're retreating in many ways back to how we started 33 years ago, which is just providing food, and that's it.
So I wanted to follow up on the warming centers. This is a big topic right now. We have done so much as a system to adapt shelters to the new reality of COVID and make sure that people can stay safe and social distanced in congregate settings. You are connected with the New Haven Coordinated Access Network, or CAN, which is, for anybody out there watching who doesn't know, in Connecticut, and I know we have people from around the country, so it's worth mentioning, not only for those of you in Connecticut who don't know the sort of insider language on this, but also for you around the country. Every town in Connecticut is part of a Coordinated Access Network, or CAN, and those different groups, those coordinated groups, which include shelters and providers and community-based organizations, and even municipalities and community members, really anybody who plays a role. These groups are very important in sort of gaming out what the strategy for making sure that we're meeting the needs of people in the community are. So to the extent, and I think the warming centers are a big question right now, so you may not have all the answers, and I don't expect you to, but to the extent that you have sort of insights into what the conversation about warming centers, I think it would be great for people to hear. And I do want to mention there's a lot we're working out right now, but just in terms of the conversation, would love to hear you comment.
Yeah, this is, in New Haven, this is very much a work in progress. We're still, I believe, waiting to hear on how many hotel rooms we'll be able to get this winter, and so how many people will be able to get off the street, out of the shelters, and into hotel rooms. So that will affect how many people are needed for the warming centers. The city of New Haven typically funds warming centers, and the idea behind warming centers is that it is literally a life-saving measure just to get people out of the cold in the winter. They're not shelters, they're not designed for people to sleep in, they don't have beds, the lights are kept on. Snacks are provided, and typically there are, there are some outreach workers on site who are either available all night or they come and go. But they are not shelters, and they're very, very low barrier, so anyone can get in. And again, it's really just a life-saving measure. In the past, the city has funded at least one warming center that will open sort of early in the season in mid-November and be open through March or sometimes early April. And then sometimes they open up a second one as the weather gets colder in January, and they'll provide 2 contracts. And typically, warming centers are located in very frequently faith-based organizations, usually churches that are somewhat centrally located, although not always. The funding that's provided for these is really just for the space. It's not providing funding for services. Again, just as a life-saving measure. This year, the city has issued an RFP, a request for proposals for a 25-person warming, for actually 2 25-person warming centers, or possibly a drop-in center. And the difference in the language there is that a warming center is for an overnight warming center, and a drop-in center would be for daytime. The idea would be that there would be something for people to go to all day long. One of the problems that we saw at the very beginning of the pandemic back in March and April, and that I think we all are sort of bracing for again this winter, is kind of this shutdown of public life. In Connecticut, we've slowly been reopening since May, and I think we just entered phase 3 this week, where restaurants can now, I think, have 75% capacity, and public life is really has been coming back to life over the last few months, and that's great, because the people we're serving really spend their days not just outside, but going, utilizing some of these publicly available spaces like libraries, like cafes and coffee shops, train stations, city hall, places that people can go inside just to get out of the weather if it's raining, or use a restroom or whatever. And all of that is very important. It's important for people to have those places to go during the day. What we saw in March and April was that all of those places shut down. Desk remains open, but downtown New Haven really turned into a bit of a ghost town. It was really quite eerie. Desk was open, and a couple of our partners, the other soup kitchens, were open. One of the other soup kitchens remains open. Another one sort of was hanging by a thread for a while. But other than that, I mean, downtown was fairly empty. Plus, our folks who were hanging out on the green with no place else to go. Again, we were fortunate in that it was a fairly mild beginning to the spring, and we lucked out in that sense, but we can't count on the spring. We have to assume the worst case scenario. We have to assume it's going to be a very cold winter, and that not only will people not have places to go in the evening overnight, but they won't have places to go during the day. And so I think that's what the city of New Haven was thinking when they issued this RFP, to account not only for overnight, but also for the daytime need this year as well. So anyway, so that's the background on warming centers and drop-in centers. As far as where desk fits into this, our hope is that there are overnight warming centers this winter, in that we can provide the meals rather than draw people out, because right now we don't feel comfortable. We don't feel like we have the facilities to be able to serve indoors during COVID. There are, I think, a lot of requirements that will go into ensuring that people are safe within these facilities. Things like exchange of some sort of HVAC system that's exchanging air outside, large enough space to be able to social distance. These are the sorts of things that we're not set up for, and really the hope is that whatever facilities do get chosen for the warming centers overnight are safe for people to be congregated in.
And so as you talk about that, and I mentioned when I talked about the cans, I mentioned the roles of providers and municipalities and even companies, but I didn't mention faith-based organizations, which are so important. And in fact, I believe at least some, if not all, of the warming centers in New Haven are in churches. So I would love to hear a little bit about faith-based organizations in in general, not just in New Haven, and their role in this system?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Again, I think, not to give a history lesson here, but I think it's important to remember that, many of the service providers that are, among homeless service providers household names, really have their origin in faith-based communities. Our origin story at Desk is that we came out of a group called Downtown Cooperative Ministries. They were later known as Interfaith Cooperative Ministries. It was a cooperative of churches in downtown New Haven that, in the early 1980s saw homelessness on the streets of New Haven and saw homelessness on the green and said, what can we do about it? And they started soup kitchens and they started shelters and and so this really was the genesis for a lot of the organizations that we all know and love today, that we don't really think of them as faith-based organizations, but this is where they got their start. In Desk's case, we are, and I said this at the beginning, but we are really very, very much driven by volunteers. In a normal year, pre-COVID, we have somewhere in the order of about 2,500 volunteers who will come through our doors over the course of the year. Some of those volunteers, they come once or twice and we never see them again. But many of the groups that come and volunteer are groups coming from churches and synagogues and other faith-based organizations in and around New Haven, and they will come on a monthly basis. And so they are actually providing a lot of the labor that goes into ensuring that the food is getting prepared properly and served all on site. So they continue to play a very, very important role for Desk in particular. The other program in New Haven that I think is worth mentioning is the Abraham's Tent program. This is a program that was started by Columbus House about 13, 14 years ago. And it brings together about 20 or so faith-based organizations, primarily churches and synagogues, as a means of diverting or removing 10 adult men from the shelter system over the course of the winter and freeing up that space. And what happens is the men will actually go as a group and go from one faith-based organization to another over the course of the winter, spending a week as guests within those churches and synagogues. And it's great for the guys because they get out into the community, they get to meet new people, they learn about a little bit more about their community, and in the past actually people have gotten jobs through connections they have made by meeting people in these settings. And for the organizations, it's really important as well, the ones that participate, because they are becoming part of the solution. They are really buying into solutions to homelessness in ways that I think many people haven't done before. So faith-based organizations are playing a very important role, and I think it's important to not forget that and not write them off as sort of a relic from the past. That they really are quite active in providing services for homeless person providers these days.
And not only that, I was going to say that within communities of color, that leadership is so important. I wonder if you could speak about some of the leaders you see in New Haven who are really faith-based leaders who are really having an impact, who are really part of the response.
Yeah, it's an incredible resource, right? These are the people who know their communities. And I don't mean simply the communities within their own faith-based organization, although of course they know those people too, but I'm thinking more of the broader communities, the people in their neighborhood. They have their ear to the ground in a way that I think a lot of service providers don't. I was actually just talking with a colleague yesterday about the importance of, about the possibility of developing neighborhood hubs, and how really it's these faith-based organizations and other local neighborhood organizations that really do get their neighborhoods, I think, in ways that that larger service providers don't, and that's just because it's a different approach. It's sort of that hyper local micro approach versus sort of that large that large 30,000 foot approach. So connecting those two and using each other as a resource, I think, is incredibly important to providing services to people who are in the neighborhoods and can be connected to service providers.
And I have to say, one of my only regrets for this conference, which has been amazing, is that we haven't had a convening of faith-based leaders as part of it, because I think faith-based leaders are so critical. I wanted to also ask you about the role of municipalities. We actually have a session with mayors coming together, mayors and first selectmen coming together at 2 o'clock today to talk about efforts to end homelessness in their communities and really think together. I'd love to hear a little bit about the role of municipalities. Obviously, you're in New Haven. You're part of a coordinated access network that involves many towns. I'd love to hear a little bit from you about the role of municipalities and what we all want to be seeing from municipalities.
Yeah, well, obviously, I think everybody always wants to see leadership coming from their municipality. We want to see good ideas coming out of them, and we want to see cooperation, right? I think right now in New Haven, we're very fortunate to have a community services administration that really is listening to the providers that have been offering services for years. It's really encouraging to see the city of New Haven taking a very progressive approach and a cooperative approach. I think everyone recognizes that no one organization can do this on their own, that it really does need to be cooperative, all the more so with municipalities. I mean, you go into any town, any city, the municipality is stretched so thin, and they have a lot of competing interests, and of course they have to deal with politics in a way that those of us who are just providing homelessness services don't have to deal with. So for them to come to us and say, we want to work with you as part of a team, is very encouraging, and I think that's the sort of approach that at least my organization appreciates, and I think our partners feel the same way.
That's great, and I would be remiss in not asking for you to comment a little bit about, people often say, and I think municipalities are especially affected by perceptions of homelessness, which might be different from the realities that as we understand them, really getting inside what's happening with individual people who people may think are homeless, may or may not be. So I'd love to hear you to talk a little bit, that was a little bit of a leading question, I didn't mean for it to be, but about when people say, I see a surge in homelessness on the green in New Haven, what's your response to that? Do you see a surge in homelessness on the green? What do you see happening right now?
I think it's really hard to say. As far as our own numbers at desk, in terms of hard numbers, really all I can report on is what we are seeing at desk. And what we're seeing at desk is we're not actually seeing more unduplicated individuals, but what we have seen is higher utilization of our services. In other words, prior to COVID, on any given night, we would see somewhere between 80 or 90 people at dinner, and then on the high nights closer to 150, right? But now what we're seeing is our numbers closer to 150 consistently. In other words, people who were accessing our services maybe just toward the ends of the month are actually coming all month long now. I think there may be a bunch of explanations for that. There could be sort of a financial explanation that people don't have as much income anymore, and people have lost jobs, and it's just and that's why they're forced to come more often. It may also be that people have lost a lot of their social outlets, and they're coming for the social aspect as well. It may just be because places are closed, or at least they had been closed in March and April and into May. So at desk, we're definitely seeing higher utilization. I don't, I'm in downtown New Haven most days, and I don't feel like I've seen more people on the green, or at least more of our people on the green. I think I've seen fewer other people on the green. I think there's been less utilization of the New Haven green just because fewer people are coming out and engaging in social life, particularly in the late spring and early summer, I guess. I think it's come back a little bit in the fall as things have opened up and as Yale has reopened and the students have come back. So, but in general, I haven't seen a sharp rise in numbers, in terms of what we're seeing right downtown. But again, it's hard to say, if people are seeing more of our folks on the green, is that because they're concentrating more on the green, or they're concentrated in certain areas, or if they're seeing fewer people, is it because they're more dispersed? I think that's a hard thing to say. I think anyone who works with the unsheltered population would agree that getting a firm sense as to how many people are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in any given area is a very difficult number to pin down.
just by nature of the movement of the population. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, that was great. You gave us a glimpse into the past. I wonder, and a little bit of a glimpse into the future, but wanted to hear your thoughts on where all of this is going. We say we are the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. We are committed to ending homelessness. What's it going to take right now with COVID and all these different stresses on the system? What's the path that you see? And you may not have the answer, but I'm just curious how you answer the question.
No, I know it's a great question, and I think everybody will have a different answer, and I think everybody's answer is probably going to end up being correct, because I think it will be sort of a multifaceted approach for, tailored to individuals in different circumstances. So, for example, I mean, I think that shelters will continue to work for many people that they have worked for in the past. But of course, as we all know, shelters have not worked for a lot of people in the past. Prior to COVID, my organization had done some strategic planning over the previous year and a half, and had decided to move toward expanding our hours and operating more as a drop-in center than sort of just an evening meals program. And we brought together a lot of different organizations and about 45 different individuals for a workshop in February, right before COVID, to sort of start hashing this out and brainstorming around what this would look like. And since then, we've been moving forward and trying to get this going. So the idea of having some sort of place that people can go, feel comfortable, are welcome, and can be connected to a variety of resources and services that can move them beyond unsheltered homelessness toward housing. I think that's really the solution. I mean, I think that's going to be an important piece of it, providing that link. Of course, once they get to that point, there needs to be funding available for housing, and so on. So I don't want to. I want to make sure that that's part of the equation. But it will continue to be sort of a trajectory, and it has to have all the pieces all together there.
And so your point about the housing, I think, comes back to why we call this the Housing Equals Justice Conference, because the solution to homelessness is housing. So it's a good point to wrap up on. I'd love to ask one more question, which is, what do you need? What kind, for people out there listening, asking, what can we do? What are and of course, financial support's always important, but just broadly, what are the kinds of things that Desk needs and that you think that other homeless service providers need to make this, to help people in the way that we want to?
No, I mean, my board members would have a heart attack if I didn't say funding. Of course, we always need funding, but also, I think if I'm speaking to other service providers, I think an open mind and a progressive attitude. I think the realization that just because we've done it in the past doesn't mean that's the way we should do it in the future. I think there should be more thinking outside the box and utilization of a recognition of what the various resources are. And I think we can't get stuck in the old ways, and we can't get stuck behind I hesitate to say this, but really the over professionalization. I mean, I think there's a lot of good ideas that are coming out of grassroots organizations that are being ignored because we look at them and say, well, they're not trained MSWs, or they're not this, or they're not that, but they have actually a lot to offer. And maybe they're not HIPAA compliant, but they do need to be listened to, and they need to be considered as having a voice, and I think that's important.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. This was really wonderful. I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us this morning and to spend with everybody out there. So thank you for spending the time. And I think we're going to wrap up right now. So here we are. So just a glimpse into the future for today. Today's schedule, we started with our member spotlight. Tomorrow we'll be kicking off the day with Open Door Shelter, which you saw a little bit of during the CAN system tour last Monday. Next up, we will be learning about colleges and universities and their roles in ending homelessness. So please tune in for that. And following that, we'll have a shelter diversion training. Really important, not just for providers, but really for anybody out there who wants to be learning how they can be working with people who are facing homelessness and helping them identify alternatives to shelter. So please do tune into that and spread the word about the shelter diversion training. Lunchtime, Justice Starts at Home, a conversation on criminal justice, housing, and segregation with an all-star cast. We're really thrilled to have Kellen Lyons from the Connecticut Mirror moderating a fabulous conversation. So please join us at lunchtime at noon. Following that, we will have Shutting the Revolving Door, a conversation about the revolving door between shelters and prisons. And this is so important, so hope that you'll be able to tune in for that conversation. And then the last session of the day will be about people with disabilities and how we can work together to build a community for people with disabilities experiencing homelessness. And we'll wrap up. Normally we have a happy hour at the end of the day, and we've been thrilled to see so many faces at those. So please join us. Today will be a little bit different because we'll be having an ice cream social, bring your own ice cream, with the Be Homeful ambassadors, who are our kid volunteers. If you know kids out there who are really passionate around ending homelessness and want to play a role, this is a really great group of kids, and they'll be doing a Q&A with our CEO, Richard Cho. It's going to be really exciting, and we'll see what they ask. We don't know yet. So that's it. Please do join us in just a few minutes for colleges and universities. And again, thank you so much to Steve Werlin from Downtown Evening Soup Kitchen, not only for the wonderful video and inside peek into the physical plant of Desk, but also for spending the time to give us a glimpse into his perspective on homelessness in New Haven and what we all need to do generally to end homelessness. Thanks so much, and see you at 10.